So Marries his housemaid. What happens next stuns the entire town. The quiet hum of the vacuum cleaner filled the grand hall of Marcus Sterling's sprawling estate. The chandelier above sparkled as sunlight streamed through the massive windows, casting kaleidoscopic patterns on the marble floor. It was a world far removed from the life Clara knew. Yet, here she was, adjusting her apron and pushing the heavy cleaner across the intricate flooring, ensuring that every surface was spotless. Clara had been working at the Sterling mansion for 3 years. Hired as a housemaid, she had quickly learned the unspoken rules of this household. Stay out of sight, speak only when spoken to, and above all, remember your place. Marcus Sterling, the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar tech conglomerate, had never so much as glanced in her direction. He was always surrounded by the whirlwind of his business empire, calls with executives, meetings with investors, and lavish parties with socialites. To him, Clara was invisible, just another cog in the well-oiled machine that kept his world immaculate. Today was no different. Clara moved quietly through the hall, her movements efficient and practiced. She didn't mind the work. It gave her a sense of purpose, even if her employers barely acknowledged her existence. Still, there were moments when she longed for something more, for a life beyond the endless cleaning and polite smiles. As she dusted the edges of the long dining table, voices echoed from the adjacent room. Marcus was on another call, his deep, commanding voice unmistakable. Clara couldn't help but overhear fragments of the conversation. "This deal has to go through," Marcus said, his tone sharp. "I don't care what it takes, seal it by the end of the week." There was a pause, followed by a muffled response. Marcus sighed audibly. "Excuses don't solve problems. Figure it out." Clara couldn't help but roll her eyes as she continued dusting. To her, Marcus was a walking stereotype, a man who seemed to value money and power above all else. She had seen him host extravagant parties, surrounded by people who laughed too hard at his jokes and hung on his every word. It was hard to imagine him being anything but cold and calculating. But something about his voice today gave her pause. Beneath the stern exterior, there was an edge of tension, even exhaustion. It was subtle, but Clara had a knack for noticing things others overlooked. The call ended abruptly, and moments later, Marcus stepped into the hall. He was impeccably dressed, as always, in a tailored suit that probably cost more than Clara made in a year. His dark hair was neatly combed, and his expression was one of quiet frustration. Clara quickly averted her gaze, focusing on the table as he walked past. She had learned long ago that drawing attention to herself was a mistake. But to her surprise, Marcus stopped. "Clara, isn't it?" he asked, his voice softer than she expected. She turned to face him, startled. "Yes, sir." Marcus studied her for a moment, as if seeing her for the first time. "You've been working here for a while, haven't you?" 3 years, she replied cautiously. He nodded, his gaze distant. "You've done a good job. The house always looks perfect." Clara blinked, unsure of how to respond. Compliments weren't something she was used to hearing from him. "Thank you, sir." Marcus seemed about to say something more but hesitated. Instead, he gave a curt nod and continued on his way, leaving Clara feeling oddly unsettled. It wasn't like him to notice her, let alone acknowledge her work. She shook her head, dismissing the encounter as a fluke, and returned to her tasks. Days turned into weeks, and Clara noticed subtle changes in Marcus's behavior. He began spending more time at home, often retreating to his study instead of attending high-profile events. The once frequent parties dwindled, and the house grew quieter. It was as if the weight of his empire was finally catching up to him. One evening, as Clara was tidying up the library, she overheard Marcus speaking on the phone again. This time, his voice lacked its usual authority. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up," he admitted, his tone heavy with frustration. "The board's breathing down my neck, and every deal feels like a gamble." The vulnerability in his voice startled Clara. She had always thought of him as invincible, untouchable. Hearing him like this made him seem human. As she left the library, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Marcus than met the eye. Beneath the polished exterior, there was a man grappling with pressures she couldn't fully understand. It was a fleeting thought, but one that lingered at the back of her mind. The turning point came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. The storm outside mirrored the tension inside the house. Marcus had called for an impromptu meeting with his staff, something he had never done before. Clara and the other employees gathered nervously in the grand hall, unsure of what to expect. Marcus stood at the top of the staircase, his expression unreadable. "I won't take up much of your time," he began, his voice steady but subdued. "I just wanted to thank you all for your hard work. I know things have been different lately, but I appreciate everything you do." The staff exchanged surprised glances. It wasn't like Marcus to address them directly, let alone express gratitude. Clara watched him closely, trying to decipher the shift in his demeanor. As the meeting ended and the staff dispersed, Marcus approached Clara. "Could you stay for a moment?" he asked. She nodded, her heart racing as she followed him to the study. The room was warm and inviting, filled with bookshelves and a crackling fireplace. Marcus gestured for her to sit, which only heightened her unease. "I wanted to ask you something," he said, sitting across from her. "Have you ever felt stuck?" Clara hesitated, unsure of how to answer. "I suppose everyone feels that way at some point," she said carefully. He nodded, his gaze fixed on the fire. "I've built my entire life around success, climbing higher, achieving more. But lately, I've been wondering if any of it matters." Clara's brow furrowed. This wasn't the Marcus she knew, the confident, commanding Sue. This was someone searching for something he couldn't name. "What makes you happy?" she asked, surprising even herself with the question. Marcus looked at her, his expression softening. "I don't know anymore." For the first time, Clara saw a crack in his armor. It was small, but it was enough to change everything. The days following that conversation in the study were unlike anything Clara had experienced in her time at the Sterling mansion. Marcus, who had always been aloof and distant, began seeking her out. His questions were subtle at first, curious inquiries about her life, her family, and her thoughts on things he had never bothered to ask before. Clara wasn't sure how to respond at first, but she found herself drawn to his quiet sincerity. One afternoon, while Clara was arranging fresh flowers in the foyer, Marcus approached her with an air of hesitance she had never seen before. "Do you have a moment?" he asked. Clara glanced at the vase in her hands, then nodded. "Of course, sir. Call me Marcus," he said, his tone soft. I've been thinking about our last conversation. About happiness." Clara set the vase down and folded her hands in front of her, unsure of where this was going. "And," she prompted, "I realize that I've spent so much of my life chasing success that I've lost sight of the things that really matter," Marcus admitted. He gestured to the grandiose surroundings of his home. "All of this, it's impressive, sure. But it's also empty." Clara tilted her head, studying him. "What brought this on?" He hesitated, then chuckled softly. "Honestly? You did?" Clara blinked, taken aback. "Me? You're grounded, Clara," Marcus said, his gaze steady. "You don't put on airs, and you don't play games. You see things for what they are. I envy that." Clara didn't know what to say. For years, she had worked in this house, blending into the background, doing her job without expecting anything in return. Now, the man who owned it all was looking at her as though she held the answers to questions he couldn't even articulate. The relationship between Marcus and Clara began to shift in ways that neither of them fully understood. It started with small things. Marcus inviting Clara to sit with him during lunch breaks, asking her opinion on books from his extensive library, or sharing quiet moments in the garden. The rest of the staff noticed the change, and while some whispered about it behind closed doors, others simply observed with quiet curiosity. One evening, Marcus found Clara in the kitchen, preparing tea. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her in silence for a moment before speaking. "You're different from anyone I've ever met," he said. Clara turned, startled. "That's quite a statement coming from someone like you." "I mean it," Marcus said, stepping closer. "You remind me that there's more to life than deals and deadlines. You ground me." Clara frowned, unsure of how to respond. "I'm just doing my job." "It's more than that," Marcus said, his voice low. "You make me feel human." The intensity of his words hung in the air, and for a moment, Clara didn't know whether to step closer or retreat. She chose the former. "I think you've always been human, Marcus," she said quietly. "You just forgot how to feel like one." The turning point came during a charity gala hosted at the mansion. Marcus, ever the perfect host, was surrounded by high-profile guests, investors, politicians, and socialites. Clara, as always, worked quietly in the background, ensuring everything ran smoothly. But as the evening progressed, Marcus found himself distracted. The conversations felt shallow, the laughter forced. He glanced across the room and saw Clara near the kitchen door, her presence a quiet but steady contrast to the chaos around him. Without thinking, he crossed the room and approached her. "Dance with me," he said, extending a hand. Clara froze, her eyes widening. "What, Marcus? I'm working." "So am I," he replied with a faint smile. "Come on." The room fell silent as Marcus led Clara to the center of the grand hall. Guests stared, whispers spreading like wildfire. Clara wanted to pull away, but Marcus's steady hand reassured her. "You're going to ruin your reputation," she whispered as they began to dance. "Maybe it's time I did," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. The aftermath of the gala was as dramatic as Clara had feared. Gossip columns exploded with speculation, and Marcus's business associates were quick to voice their disapproval. "You're risking everything," one of his board members said during an emergency meeting. This infatuation is going to cost you your company. If my company can't handle me treating someone with respect, then maybe I don't want it," Marcus shot back. Clara, for her part, was overwhelmed by the attention. Strangers approached her on the street, asking invasive questions. Some of the staff began treating her differently, some with envy, others with disdain. Through it all, Marcus stood by her side, unwavering in his decision to make their relationship public. But the real challenge came when Marcus's family intervened. The confrontation with Marcus's family happened sooner than he expected. His older brother, Gregory, and his mother, Evelyn Sterling, summoned him to the family estate under the pretense of discussing business. Marcus knew better. This was about Clara. He walked into the grand sitting room, where his mother sat perched on a velvet armchair, her sharp gaze fixed on him. Gregory stood by the fireplace, arms crossed, exuding disapproval before the conversation even began. "You're late," Evelyn said, her tone clipped. "I had other priorities," Marcus replied evenly, taking a seat across from her. Gregory wasted no time. "What's this we're hearing about you and a housemaid? Have you completely lost your mind?" Marcus leaned back, unbothered by his brother's accusatory tone. "Her name is Clara, and I suggest you address her with respect." "Respect?" Evelyn's voice cut through the room like a blade. "She's a servant, Marcus. She cleans floors and dusts furniture. You're the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company. What could you possibly have in common?" Marcus met her glare without flinching. "She's honest, kind, and intelligent, qualities that seem to be in short supply in this family." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "This isn't just about you, Marcus. Your decisions affect all of us. Your reputation is tied to this family, and you're dragging it through the mud." Gregory chimed in. "Do you have any idea what the board is saying? Investors are questioning your judgment. This isn't just a scandal, it's a liability." Marcus sighed, his patience wearing thin. "I didn't come here to justify my choices to either of you. Clara is a part of my life now, whether you like it or not." Evelyn's lips pressed into a thin line. "This phase will pass. You'll come to your senses." "It's not a phase," Marcus said firmly. "And you don't get to decide who I choose to be with." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Evelyn finally stood, her expression cold. "If you continue down this path, Marcus, don't expect any support from this family." Marcus stood as well, his gaze unwavering. "I don't need your support, Mother. I never have." As Marcus drove back to his mansion, his thoughts were a whirlwind. His family's reaction had been predictable, but it still stung. They had always been more concerned with appearances than substance, and this was no different. But he refused to let their narrow-mindedness dictate his life. When he arrived home, Clara was in the garden, tending to a row of flowers. She looked up as he approached, sensing the tension in his posture. "Rough day?" she asked softly. "You could say that," he replied, sitting on the edge of a nearby bench. Clara wiped her hands on her apron and sat beside him. Do you want to talk about it? Marcus hesitated, then nodded. I told my family about us. It didn't go well. Clara's expression faltered, a mix of worry and guilt crossing her face. Marcus, I didn't ask for any of this. If it's causing too much trouble, stop, he interrupted, turning to face her. This isn't about them. It's about us. And I'm not going to let their opinions dictate my life. She searched his eyes, seeing the sincerity in them. You're willing to risk everything for this? For you, he said without hesitation. Clara's heart ached at his words. She had spent her life believing that someone like Marcus Sterling could never truly see her, let alone choose her. Yet here he was, defying his family and his world for her. The days that followed were tumultuous. News of Marcus's defiance spread quickly, and the gossip only grew louder. Clara became a target for scrutiny, with tabloids spinning stories about her motives and background. Strangers whispered behind her back, and even some of the staff treated her differently. Through it all, Marcus remained steadfast. He made a point of including Clara in his daily life, whether it was taking her out to dinner or introducing her to colleagues as his partner. It was his way of showing the world, and Clara, that he wasn't ashamed of their relationship. But the pressure took its toll. Clara began to withdraw, her confidence eroded by the constant judgment. One evening, as they sat in the library, she finally spoke up. Marcus, maybe this isn't worth it, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He looked at her, startled. What are you talking about? I've been thinking, she continued, avoiding his gaze. Maybe I don't belong in your world. I'm just a housemaid. You deserve someone who fits. Stop, Marcus said, his tone firm but gentle. He reached for her hands, holding them tightly. You belong wherever you want to be, Clara. And I want you here. With me. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away. It's not that simple. It is, he insisted. I don't care what the world thinks. All that matters is what we want. Clara nodded, though the doubt lingered in her heart. She wanted to believe him, but the weight of their situation was almost too much to bear. The climax came during a charity gala hosted by Marcus's company. It was his first public appearance with Clara as his date, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. The room was filled with high-profile guests, all eager to see how the evening would unfold. Clara wore a simple but elegant dress that Marcus had gifted her, and she looked stunning. But as they entered the grand ballroom, the murmurs and stares were impossible to ignore. Clara felt like an imposter, but Marcus's reassuring presence gave her strength. As the evening progressed, a group of socialites approached them, their smiles thinly veiled with disdain. So, Marcus, one of them said, her tone dripping with condescension. Is this the famous Clara we've been hearing so much about? She is, Marcus replied calmly. And she's the most remarkable person I've ever met. The woman's smile faltered, but she quickly recovered. How charming! Clara held her head high, refusing to let their judgment affect her. But the moment was interrupted by an announcement from the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, the host said, we have a special presentation tonight, courtesy of Marcus Sterling. Marcus stepped forward, taking Clara's hand. Together, they walked to the stage, where Marcus took the microphone. This evening is about more than charity, he began, his voice steady. It's about challenging the way we see the world, and each other. He glanced at Clara, his gaze softening. Clara has taught me more about life, love, and humanity than I ever thought possible. And tonight, I want the world to know that I'm proud to stand beside her. The room erupted in applause, and for the first time, Clara felt truly seen, not as a housemaid, but as someone worthy of love and respect. As the applause echoed through the grand ballroom, Clara felt a wave of emotions crash over her, relief, pride, but also an undercurrent of fear. Marcus might have declared his feelings for her publicly, but the judgmental glances and murmured conversations didn't stop. It was as if every eye in the room was scrutinizing her, dissecting her presence beside a man like Marcus. Once they stepped off the stage, a new wave of challenges began. Investors and board members, who had been on the fence about Marcus's recent decisions, began to approach him one by one. Some shook his hand politely, masking their unease, while others outright questioned his judgment. Marcus, can I have a word? It was William, one of the oldest board members, with decades of experience and a reputation for being particularly ruthless. Clara stepped aside as Marcus nodded, signaling that she should wait for him near one of the tables. She watched from a distance as William leaned in, speaking with fervor, his gestures growing more animated. Marcus stood firm, his posture unyielding, but Clara couldn't ignore the tension radiating from him. A few minutes later, Marcus returned, his expression unreadable. "What did he say?" Clara asked quietly. Marcus sighed, loosening his tie. "The usual. That I'm risking everything by being with you. That my decisions are putting the company in jeopardy." Clara frowned. "And what did you say?" "I told him it's none of his business," Marcus replied, his voice firm. "And that if the company can't survive me living my life authentically, then maybe it doesn't deserve to survive." His words were bold, but Clara couldn't shake the growing sense of unease. She knew Marcus was fighting battles on multiple fronts: his family, his board, and the relentless scrutiny of the media. And while she admired his resolve, she also worried about the toll it was taking on him. Later that night, as the gala wound down and guests began to leave, Marcus and Clara retreated to a quiet corner of the ballroom. The soft glow of chandeliers cast a warm light over the room, but the weight of the evening still lingered. "You know," Marcus began, his voice low, "there was a time when I thought events like this defined success. The suits, the speeches, the deals, it all seemed so important." Clara tilted her head, studying him. "And now I see it for what it is," he said, glancing around the room. "Smoke and mirrors. None of this means anything without something real." His eyes met hers, and the sincerity in his gaze made her heart ache. "You're the only real thing in my life, Clara. And I'm not going to let anyone take that away." Before Clara could respond, a photographer approached, camera in hand. "Excuse me, Mr. Sterling, would you and your guest mind posing for a photo?" Marcus hesitated, glancing at Clara for her consent. She nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. Together, they stood as the flash went off, capturing a moment that would soon become headline news. The next morning, Clara woke to the sound of her phone buzzing incessantly. She groggily reached for it, only to find dozens of notifications, messages from old acquaintances, headlines from gossip sites, and even a few requests for interviews. "Clara, you need to see this," Marcus called from the living room. She hurried downstairs to find him seated on the couch, his laptop open. On the screen was an article with the headline, "From Housemaid to Heiress?" Marcus Sterling's shocking gala declaration. The article recounted every detail of the previous night, from Marcus's public speech to the photograph that now graced the front page of every major outlet. The comments section was a minefield of opinions, some supportive, others scathing. "This is a lot," Clara said, sinking onto the couch beside him. "It's nothing we can't handle," Marcus reassured her, though she could hear the weariness in his voice. "But it does mean we're going to have to brace ourselves. This is just the beginning." As the days passed, the scrutiny only intensified. Paparazzi camped outside the mansion, hoping to catch a glimpse of the couple. Social media was ablaze with debates about their relationship, with some hailing it as a modern fairy tale and others dismissing it as a calculated publicity stunt. Clara did her best to stay grounded, focusing on her daily routines and avoiding the headlines. But even she couldn't ignore the whispers that followed her whenever she ventured into town. Strangers pointed, whispered, and sometimes approached her with invasive questions. One afternoon, while shopping for groceries, Clara overheard a pair of women gossiping near the produce aisle. "She must have some kind of hold over him," one of them said, her voice dripping with disdain. "There's no way someone like Marcus Sterling would choose her otherwise." Clara clenched her jaw, forcing herself to walk away. But the words stung, no matter how much she tried to brush them off. When she returned home, Marcus noticed her subdued demeanor immediately. "What happened?" he asked, concern etched across his face. "Nothing," Clara said, avoiding his gaze. "Just people being people." Marcus frowned. "Clara, you don't have to go through this alone. If it's too much, I can." "No," she interrupted, her voice firm. "I'm not going to let them scare me off. We've come this far, Marcus. I'm not giving up now." Her resolve only deepened Marcus's admiration for her. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but with Clara by his side, he felt more determined than ever to face whatever challenges came their way. The media frenzy around Marcus and Clara showed no signs of slowing down. Every move they made became a headline, every glance or word captured and dissected by the public. Despite Marcus's unwavering support, Clara couldn't help but feel the weight of the scrutiny bearing down on her. Yet she refused to let it break her. One evening, as the sun set over the sprawling estate, Clara stood by the garden, her fingers lightly brushing the petals of a rose bush. The air was cool, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink. It was her sanctuary, a place to think and escape the chaos of the outside world. "Penny for your thoughts?" Marcus's voice came from behind her, breaking her reverie. She turned to see him approaching, his expression soft. "Just needed some fresh air," she replied, offering a small smile. Marcus stepped closer, his hands in his pockets. "You've been quiet lately." "I've just been processing everything," Clara admitted. "It's a lot to take in." "I know," he said gently. "And I hate that you're going through this because of me." "It's not your fault," she said quickly. "You've done nothing but stand by me. Sometimes I wonder if I'm strong enough for all of this." "You are," Marcus said firmly, taking her hand in his. "You're stronger than anyone I've ever met. And no matter what the world throws at us, we'll face it together." His words brought a lump to her throat, but before she could respond, one of the staff approached hesitantly. "Mr. Sterling, there's someone at the gate asking to see you." "They said it's urgent?" Marcus frowned. "Who is it?" "They didn't give their name, sir, but they insisted it was important." Exchanging a glance with Clara, Marcus nodded. "I'll handle it. Stay here." Marcus made his way to the front gate, where a man in a sharp suit was waiting. His posture was rigid, his expression one of thinly veiled disdain. Marcus recognized him immediately, Daniel Graves, one of the company's most prominent investors. "Daniel," Marcus greeted, his tone neutral. "What brings you here?" Daniel didn't bother with pleasantries. "I came to talk some sense into you." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" "This relationship of yours," Daniel began, gesturing vaguely in the direction of the mansion. "It's causing quite a stir. Investors are nervous. The board is restless. And frankly, I don't blame them." Marcus crossed his arms. "If you've come to deliver an ultimatum, save your breath. My personal life is none of your concern." "That's where you're wrong," Daniel said sharply. "Your personal life affects your professional reputation. And right now, that reputation is hanging by a thread." Marcus's jaw tightened. "I won't apologize for being with someone I care about. If that's a problem, you're welcome to take your investments elsewhere." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Do you really want to go down this road, Marcus? You have everything to lose." "And yet, I've never felt more sure of my decisions," Marcus replied evenly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have more important things to attend to." Daniel's mouth pressed into a thin line, but he said nothing further as Marcus turned and walked back toward the mansion. Clara was waiting for him by the garden, her expression a mix of concern and curiosity. "Who was it?" she asked. "Just someone trying to tell me how to live my life," Marcus said with a faint smile. "Nothing I haven't heard before." Clara sighed. "You're fighting so many battles, Marcus. Doesn't it get exhausting?" "Sometimes," he admitted. "But when I look at you, I know it's worth it." The following weeks brought new challenges. Marcus's family, still reeling from his defiance, launched their own attempts to undermine his relationship with Clara. They reached out to mutual acquaintances, hoping to turn public opinion against him. Gossip columns continued to publish scathing articles, and social media remained a battlefield of conflicting opinions. Through it all, Clara remained a pillar of quiet strength. She refused to let the negativity consume her, channeling her energy into small acts of kindness, helping the staff, tending to the garden, and even volunteering at a local shelter. One day, as she was packing boxes of supplies for the shelter, Marcus walked in, carrying a folder of documents. "What are you up to?" he asked, setting the folder on the counter. "Just gathering some things for the shelter," Clara replied. "It helps to stay busy." Marcus smiled, his admiration for her growing with each passing day. "You have a way of seeing the good in everything, don't you?" "I try," she said with a shrug. "It's better than focusing on the bad." As Marcus watched her work, an idea began to take shape in his mind. He didn't share it with her just yet, but he knew it was time to take their story and their fight to the next level. That evening, Marcus called a meeting with his PR team. He outlined a plan that would not only address the media frenzy but also shift the narrative in their favor. It was bold, risky, and unconventional, but Marcus was confident it would work. When he shared the plan with Clara, she was initially hesitant. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. "It feels overwhelming." "It's the only way to change the conversation," Marcus said. "And I'll be right there with you every step of the way." After a moment of contemplation, Clara nodded. "But let's do it." The plan Marcus had devised was simple yet powerful: to host a charity event at the mansion that showcased Clara's efforts with the local shelter and highlighted her authenticity, compassion, and humanity. It would be a public demonstration of everything he admired about her, forcing people to see her not as a housemaid but as a woman with depth and purpose. The event planning was intense. Marcus involved Clara every step of the way, ensuring her input shaped the occasion. Invitations were sent to key figures in the community, media outlets, and Marcus's business associates. The theme was clear: generosity and community. The event would spotlight Clara's work with the shelter and celebrate the lives she had impacted. As the date approached, Clara's nervousness grew. "What if they see right through me?" she asked Marcus one evening, pacing the living room. "They won't," Marcus said, pulling her gently into his arms. "Because there's nothing to see through. You're real, Claire. That's what makes you different, and it's what they'll respect." Clara took a deep breath, his words offering some comfort. Still, the thought of standing before a crowd, many of whom had judged her harshly, was daunting. The evening of the event arrived, and the mansion was transformed into a vibrant yet welcoming space. Guests began arriving, their curiosity evident as they observed the transformation. Reporters lingered near the entrance, cameras flashing as notable figures stepped through the grand doors. Clara stood in one of the side rooms, her heart pounding. She wore a simple yet elegant dress Marcus had chosen for her, the soft fabric flowing gracefully around her. One of the staff entered to let her know it was time. "You've got this," Marcus whispered as he joined her. He held out his arm, and she took it, drawing strength from his unwavering support. The moment they stepped into the main hall, a hush fell over the crowd. All eyes turned toward them, the air thick with anticipation. Marcus led her to the stage, where a microphone waited. He took the mic first, his voice steady and confident. "Thank you all for being here tonight. This event isn't just about charity, it's about acknowledging the extraordinary impact one person can have on a community." He gestured toward Clara. "This is Clara. Many of you know her as someone who's been a part of my household for years, but what you may not know is the incredible work she's done beyond these walls. She's dedicated her time and energy to helping those in need, bringing hope and light to countless lives." Clara stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly as she took the microphone. "I never imagined I'd be standing here, in front of so many people," she began, her voice soft but clear. "I grew up in a world far removed from all of this, but I've always believed in the power of kindness. It's what drives me to do what I do." She paused, scanning the crowd. "I know some of you may question why I'm here or what I have to offer. And to be honest, I've questioned it myself. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that we all have value, no matter where we come from or what we do. And tonight, I hope to show you that our differences don't define us. It's our actions that do." The room erupted in applause, and Clara felt a wave of relief wash over her. As she stepped back, Marcus squeezed her hand, his pride evident. The event was a resounding success. Guests mingled, many approaching Clara to express their admiration and curiosity. The media captured every moment, their cameras no longer focused solely on Marcus but on the woman who had captivated the room. However, the evening wasn't without its challenges. A small group of Marcus's business associates remained skeptical, their whispered conversations betraying their doubts. One of them, a sharply dressed woman named Victoria, approached Clara as the evening wound down. "You spoke beautifully tonight," she said, her tone polite but guarded. "Thank you," Clara replied, offering a genuine smile. "But I can't help but wonder," Victoria continued, her eyes narrowing slightly, "what your endgame is. Surely you understand the position you've put Marcus in?" Clara's smile faltered, but she stood her ground. "My only endgame is to live authentically. If that's a problem for you, I'm sorry, but it's not something I'll apologize for." Victoria raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback by Clara's response. Before she could say more, Marcus appeared at Clara's side. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his tone calm but firm. "Not at all," Clara said, her voice steady. "Just a friendly conversation." Victoria excused herself quickly, leaving Marcus and Clara alone. "You handled that well," he said, his admiration evident. "I'm learning," Clara replied, a hint of a smile on her lips. As the night came to an end, Marcus and Clara stood on the balcony overlooking the garden. The event had been a turning point, not just for their relationship but for how the world saw them. "You did it," Marcus said, wrapping an arm around her. "You proved them all wrong." Clara leaned into him, her gaze fixed on the stars above. "I didn't do it alone." "No," Marcus agreed. "We did it together." And for the first time since their journey began, Clara felt a deep sense of peace. The road ahead might still be difficult, but she knew they could face it together. The days following the charity event brought a mixture of relief and new challenges. The press coverage was overwhelmingly positive, with headlines praising Clara's speech and the couple's commitment to making a difference. For a brief moment, it felt like the tide was turning in their favor. But with every step forward came whispers of doubt and resistance. Marcus's family, emboldened by their disapproval, began a quiet campaign to sway public opinion back against Clara. Evelyn Sterling, ever the strategist, reached out to influential friends and business leaders, planting seeds of skepticism about Clara's intentions. Clara noticed the shift during her daily errands. The glances from strangers were sharper, their whispers louder. While some people offered kind words, others weren't as subtle in their judgments. One afternoon, while picking up supplies for the shelter, Clara overheard two women talking near the checkout counter. They didn't even bother to lower their voices. "She's playing the long game, you know," one of them said, her tone dripping with disdain. "Marrying into money like that? It's a classic gold-digger move." Clara clenched her fists but kept her head held high. She had promised herself she wouldn't let the negativity get to her, but moments like these tested her resolve. When she returned home, Marcus was waiting for her in the kitchen. He could tell immediately that something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked, his voice full of concern. "Nothing I can't handle," Clara replied, setting the bags on the counter. "Just more people assuming they know my story." Marcus sighed, running a hand through his hair. "This is getting out of hand. I'm going to call a press conference and address this head-on." "No," Clara said quickly, shaking her head. "You've done enough, Marcus. You've stood by me through everything. I need to face this on my own." He frowned, clearly unhappy with the idea. "Clara, you don't have to do this alone." "I know," she said softly, placing a hand on his. "But I need to prove to myself, and to everyone else, that I'm not just here because of you. I need to stand on my own 2 feet." That evening, Clara sat down with a notebook and began drafting a plan. She wanted to share her story, not the version twisted by gossip and assumptions, but the truth. With Marcus's help, she arranged for an interview with a respected journalist who was known for her fair reporting. The interview took place in the mansion's sunroom, a cozy and welcoming space that reflected Clara's warmth. The journalist, a sharp but empathetic woman named Lila, arrived with a small camera crew and a list of questions. As the cameras rolled, Clara spoke openly about her upbringing, her dreams, and the path that had led her to the Sterling mansion. She didn't shy away from the challenges she had faced, but she also made it clear that her relationship with Marcus wasn't about status or wealth. "Marcus saw something in me that no one else did," Clara said, her voice steady. "And he gave me the courage to see it in myself. I don't expect everyone to understand, but I hope they can see that this isn't about power or money. It's about 2 people who found each other in the most unlikely circumstances." When the interview aired a few days later, The response was overwhelming. Messages of support poured in from all over the world, from people who resonated with Clara's story and admired her resilience. Even some of Marcus's harshest critics began to soften, recognizing the authenticity of their connection. However, not everyone was swayed. Evelyn Sterling, watching the interview from her opulent living room, felt her anger simmering. She refused to accept that this woman, this housemaid, could ever be a part of their family. Determined to put an end to the relationship once and for all, she devised a plan. A week later, Clara received an unexpected invitation to tea at the Sterling estate. The handwritten note, signed by Evelyn, was polite but formal. Clara hesitated, unsure of the older woman's intentions, but Marcus encouraged her to go. Maybe she wants to make amends, he suggested, though his tone was uncertain. I doubt it, Clara said. But if this is her way of extending an olive branch, I'll hear her out. When Clara arrived at the estate, she was greeted by a butler who led her to a lavish sitting room. Evelyn was already seated, her posture as rigid as her expression. Clara, Evelyn said, gesturing to the chair opposite her. Thank you for coming. Clara sat down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. What did you want to talk about? Evelyn's smile didn't reach her eyes. I wanted to understand you better. You've caused quite a stir after all. I didn't intend to, Clara said calmly. But I won't apologize for being with Marcus. Of course not, Evelyn said smoothly. But you must understand the position you've put him in. The Sterling name carries a great deal of weight, and it's not something we take lightly. Clara met Evelyn's gaze, her voice unwavering. With all due respect, Mrs. Sterling, Marcus is capable of making his own decisions. He doesn't need anyone to tell him what's best for him. Evelyn's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but she recovered quickly. You're a confident young woman, Clara. I'll give you that. But confidence doesn't erase the realities of the world we live in. Marcus's choices affect more than just himself. Clara leaned forward, her eyes steady. You're right, his choices do affect others. And so do mine. That's why I'm choosing to stand by him, no matter what. Because he's worth it? Evelyn's expression hardened, but before she could respond, the butler entered to announce Marcus's arrival. He strode into the room, his presence commanding as always. Mother, he said, his tone cool. I hope you're not giving Clara a hard time. Not at all, Evelyn said, rising to her feet. We were just having a friendly conversation. Marcus raised an eyebrow but didn't press the matter. Instead, he took Clara's hand, leading her out of the room. As they walked to the car, Clara couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. Evelyn might not have accepted her, but she hadn't broken her either. As Clara and Marcus drove away from the Sterling estate, the tension from the meeting with Evelyn began to fade. Clara glanced at Marcus, her heart swelling with gratitude and love for the man who had stood by her through everything. Thank you, she said softly. Marcus turned to her, surprised. For what? For always being on my side, Clara replied. Even when it would have been easier to let me go. He reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. Clara, you've given me more than I could ever repay. You've shown me what truly matters. They returned home to find a flurry of messages awaiting them. The interview had sparked a wave of support, with people from all walks of life sharing their admiration for Clara's story. Even Marcus's staff seemed to have a renewed respect for her, treating her not as an outsider but as a part of the family. But the biggest surprise came a week later. Evelyn Sterling arrived unannounced at the mansion, her expression unreadable. Clara and Marcus were in the garden when the butler informed them of her presence. Let her in, Marcus said, though his tone was wary. Evelyn joined them in the garden, her usual air of superiority noticeably absent. She took a seat across from them, her gaze settling on Clara. I've been thinking about our last conversation, Evelyn began, her voice quieter than usual. And about everything that's happened since Marcus introduced you to the world. Clara exchanged a glance with Marcus, unsure of where this was going. Evelyn sighed, her shoulders sagging slightly. I've spent so much of my life protecting this family's name, worrying about what others think, that I forgot what really matters. Seeing the way you two look at each other, it reminded me of something I've been missing for a long time. Clara's breath caught in her throat. Was this an olive branch? I can't promise to change overnight, Evelyn continued, her gaze meeting Clara's. But I can try. For Marcus's sake, and for yours. Clara nodded, her voice steady but kind. That's all I could ever ask for. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of progress. Evelyn's tentative acceptance paved the way for a new chapter in Marcus and Clara's lives. The media frenzy gradually died down, replaced by genuine admiration for their resilience and love story. Marcus's company also began to recover. The board members who had initially doubted him came around after seeing his commitment to both Clara and the values he had championed through her story. Investors who had wavered returned, inspired by the authenticity Marcus brought to his leadership. For Clara, life took on a new rhythm. She continued her work with the shelter, using her platform to raise awareness and funds for causes close to her heart. She and Marcus grew closer, their bond strengthened by the trials they had faced together. One evening, as they sat on the balcony overlooking the city, Marcus turned to Clara with a small box in his hand. "What's that?" Clara asked, her curiosity piqued. Marcus opened the box to reveal a simple but elegant ring. "I've been thinking about this for a long time," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "Clara, you've changed my life in ways I never thought possible. You've shown me the beauty in the simplest things, the strength in vulnerability, and the power of love. I can't imagine my life without you. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Clara's eyes as she nodded, unable to find the words. "Yes," she finally whispered. 1,000 times, yes. Their wedding was a small, intimate affair, held in the garden of the mansion where their story had begun. The guest list was a mix of family, friends, and the people whose lives Clara had touched through her work. Even Evelyn was there, her smile genuine as she watched her son and his bride exchange vows. As Marcus and Clara stood together, surrounded by love and support, they knew they had overcome every obstacle in their path. Their journey had been anything but easy, but it had brought them to this moment, a testament to the strength of their love and the power of staying true to themselves. And as they danced under the stars, the whispers of the past faded into the background, replaced by the promise of a future built on trust, resilience, and unwavering devotion.